and welcome to Huddle Breakdown. An early one this week, what with all the comings and goings that are going on this week. We're back in Champions League action and I was going to say dropped 2 points against Aberdeen, but depending on whatever way you look at it, we went a point further ahead at the top of the league than some of the competitors. That we will get into. I'm joined as always by James and Alan. Alan, how are you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you. Good to see you all.
Good stuff. James, have you finally been put out into the doghouse? Is that where you are today?
That is where I am. Actually, I'm having a bit of PTSD here. I'm at my parents' based off of some family issues that are going on. And I feel like I'm sneaking a cigarette when I was in high school or something, out in the garage, trying to do something I'm not supposed to be doing. So, but yeah, different environment today recording.
Yeah, there is something about going back to your parents' house and reverting to the child that you once were, no matter what your age. We all do that, I'm sure. But that being said, we will get on to this week's action. Alan, as you like to do, you've done your breakdown of the game against Aberdeen. Everybody watching this will know, went in at half-time 2-0 up. Expected to see the game out. I was talking to a gentleman in the pub in Liverpool where I was watching the game who expected us to comfortably see the game out. 4 or 5 is what he said. That was not to be the case. It finished 2 each with Aberdeen coming back from 2-0 down and having a goal chopped off that might have seen them win it. Alan, what were your overall impressions of the game?
Yeah, I mean, listen, let's not be too churlish, I suppose. It was a terrifically entertaining game. In all respects, in terms of a big comeback, it looked like they'd even, like as you say, turned that 2-goal deficit into a win. Then you had all the drama of the sort of last 20 minutes, really, and the extra time period and the number of chances that Celtic generated, and yeah, so it was a terrific game, terrific entertainment, first and foremost. But actually, the first half, if you took away the sort of drama heightened by the fact that it was the top 2 in the league and both teams were unbeaten, it was basically a typical SPFL home game for Celtic. They more or less utterly dominated the match, went in 2 goals ahead, could have been more. But there was this shadow, there was this latent threat that was always there. And then even from kickoff, Aberdeen didn't do what 99% of teams do and hoof the ball up the pitch. They actually tried to play the ball into midfield. Hatate got a touch on it, intercepted it. It went to McGrath, and he immediately played a through ball down the middle of the pitch. And I was like kind of taken aback by that. I thought, whoa, that's interesting. And actually, that threat was always there. Now, it didn't manifest until the moment. When I can't remember, I think it was at Nisbet or Keskinen broke through the middle, and Johnson kind of rashly tackled him when Trusty had it covered, took both Trusty and the forward out, and the ball fell to Clarkson. I think it was 2-0 at that point. Clarkson pretty much had an open goal, and Trusty actually got back to block, or Valle got back to block, I think, the shot. So by the data and by the majority of the play, it was literally a run-of-the-mill Celtic. You could easily see Celtic running out, winning this game 3-4-0. But you just had this little nagging doubt that, whoa, they've got a bit of pace up front. They're committing people, often 4 players are committing up front, and they're going to play the ball very quickly in behind. And as we know, we play a very high line. So in the second half, what you had to say was that Tallinn, he kept doubling down until he won, basically. Things you don't do. I mean, James is more of a gambler than I am, but things you're not supposed to do, which is, you keep doubling down, and he did. He threw on pace at half-time, and he kept adding pace until he got back in the game. The goal that broke the game after about 50 minutes was just, we'll look ahead to the Atalanta game, but that goal was just the thing of nightmares if you think about Celtic in a European context. Because, with the best will in the world, and honestly, no disrespect intended. I mean, Nilsson looks like a really solid player, really great addition at the SPFL level, right? He's nowhere near mobile enough. to stand out at any European level, even conference level, I would suggest, right? So he took out the whole Celtic midfield with one simple lofted pass to McGrath. Now, McGrath, I really like McGrath, always liked him, really good player, very attacking in his everything that he does. I got a lovely vision about him. He immediately played a through ball, took out the whole Celtic defence. So 2 passes have taken out 9 players, right? Because Kyogo was already ahead, behind the ball when this move started. 2 passes, the whole team's taken out, and 3 touches and the ball's in the back of the net, right? And Sockler is one of the worst finishers I've ever seen, and McGrath is a really good SPFL player. But again, even at conference level in Europe, he probably wouldn't be a standout. So you've got to think, what would good players do to Celtic in that scenario? If you've got any pace at all up front and you're running through with Liam Scales chasing you, it's basically how's your finishing. That's what it's going to come down to, right? So fair play. That's how they played all game. They looked for that ball through the middle. They looked to hit Celtic with an early ball over the top, very direct. They committed the thing that they did differently to what most teams do is they committed players forward. Now, I think 2 things really I would say in terms of Aberdeen, and is that one, they tired really badly and they were absolutely clinging on. I mean, they were dead on their feet. So right, so that suggests to me that can the way that they play scale to playing 2 or 3 games against Celtic level opposition? I'd be sceptical. I think they're going to get caught out at some point. And secondly is, they do commit players forward. And if you're going to play that way, you probably don't want Nilsson and Shinnie being your screening midfielders when teams hit you in transition, because they just simply don't have the pace. And Celtic absolutely blew them away on 2 or 3 occasions, hitting them in transition in behind. So just saying that in terms of, how we think Aberdeen will fare, because that was we really wondered how good they were, because the data said, oh, they seem to be overperforming. But you watch them and you think, well, there's a plan there, and they're quite happy to defend. They are quite happy to defend. And so in some ways, it was cohesion over number generating, if you know what I mean. And I like that. I think that's really interesting. And again, to me, this was an example of confidence, belief, work rate, togetherness, and a well executed plan, really earning the fortune that they may well have deserved. Because, when I say were they fortunate, I'm not being churlish here, right? So my XG model, said that Celtic generated over 4 XG in this game. Now, we can have a disagreement about XG models, but the point is I always use the same one, and therefore it's apples with apples, and we go through all the results through history, right? So quiz time, Laura, I'll let you have a go at this. Going back to, it's about 8 years, I think. How many times do you think Celtic have generated more than 4 XG in a match? Roughly.
I'm trying to think of any big results that we've had over the years. We had a few under Ange, a few under Brendan the first time. I'm going to say 8 years would be roughly, just in the quick maths, I'm going to say 10 games.
No, actually, it's 33.
Wow.
34 after. I know it's a lot. I was surprised.
Really?
So 34 times in my database, Celtic have generated over 4 in XG, right? Mm-hmm. Guess how many games they haven't won? James?
This is probably the first one. Yeah.
This is the first one.
Yeah.
This is the first one. Not only that, there are only 2 matches in that run of 34 matches where Celtic have won by only a single goal. That was a 2-1 win at St Mirren in 2014. And that, if you remember that crazy game against Hearts in the League Cup very early under Ange, where we absolutely battered them and won 3-2, but it was something ridiculous like 5 XG difference. So those are the only 2 games that Celtic have only won by a goal in that run. In those 33 games that Celtic have won, the aggregate goals is 146-17. Right, so this, so when I say fortune, that's what I mean. You cannot say that Aberdeen weren't fortunate to get away with an absolute hiding here. But as I say, I come back to, and I don't want that to be the focus of my little analysis here. I come back to, there's something more going on here. They earned that fortune. They committed to a plan. It was a very brave plan. and they executed it reasonably well, and they defended. They defended. The keeper made the saves he needed to make. The defenders made the blocks they needed to make. So I suspect, I'm not sure that it's sustainable for the reasons that I mentioned in terms of a title challenge. I'm sceptical now that I've watched them. Cup is certainly within their grasp. And I think, given the way that the Rangers play, this Aberdeen team's going to cause them a lot of trouble. So, very entertaining game. They got the luck they deserved. And I think Celtic were exposed for some pretty horrendous risks that I think, as we come to the Atalanta preview, we'll talk about further.
Yeah, James, Alan brings up an awful lot of good points there about the plan that Aberdeen had, and how they identified weaknesses that we undoubtedly have, to try and get back into the game, which they obviously did. I guess my question to you would be, what about the Aberdeen team in the second half were you really impressed by, and what did you think, or did you see the turnaround coming as it was happening in real time?
I wouldn't say that. I mean, I was probably closer to consensus, thinking that, it would end up maybe 4-1, something like that. I thought they'd probably end up scoring, just because they were doing some relatively smart things on the ball. I mean, there's some nuance to that, but, they were kind of in between. They're being smart about their build-up, so they were building up and doing it when it was safe. But then as soon as they got any real pressure, they were launching. So they were, they weren't building up like they normally do, because I think they were prepared for the jeopardy of our press, for example. So there was, and to Alan's point, I mean, they've got some guys that can hurt you. I mean, McGraw, I think, I've said consistently, him, McAllen now and Blair Spittle were the three guys where I'm like, domestically, I'm like, I could see them playing at Celtic and, because of the skill sets they have, actually kicking some ass domestically in particular, right? They would fit with how we play and potentially thrive playing at Celtic, even though, as Alan said, they're not, probably at the level that we would aspire to as far as from a European perspective. So, they've got some guys that can hit you with those through balls and that kind of thing. So I expected probably, something in the 4-1 range going into halftime, but, give them credit. And I think, we did, whether we were fatigued or, got into this potential, I don't know, complacency is not the right word, but you start to look ahead to the next game because you're up 2-0. Like maybe you just took, that little bit off the accelerator. We always talk about game state, and that can work different ways, so, we don't run up the score sometimes because we do maybe take the foot off the gas a little bit. So I think that could have played into it. And let's be frank, they took their chances. I mean, that's the other thing. And they had a deflection that, really helped them. So, but this is what we talk about when we talk about variance and you get into these ranges of risk of dropping points. Like this is going to be way out on the edge of games that, you're going to drop points. That you could play this game 100 times and this probably is the only time we drop points, that kind of things. Like this is one of those kind of outlier games. The other observation I'll add, because Alan did a great job echoing most of what I would have said anyway, is the two parts of the composition of our chance creation that lent itself to bad variance. And Alan might be able to just recount this. Like I don't remember us getting as much XG from set plays in a game as we did in this game. I think we were. Yeah. I think almost half of our XG was coming from set plays and even particular corners. And, so that speaks to the quality of the deliveries that we were getting. And we were taking some short, but I think we had like 15 corners or something. So, a large number of those were delivered onto heads that we just didn't score on. They were contested some, but, one was saved, one was shot right at Mithoff. So, these were quality chances within the context of corners. And then we had something like 14 block shots, which, again, to their credit, but a lot of that was in the last, let's say, half hour. when they were just completely compressed into their box and we were trying to shoot through it, which again, I'm not necessarily opposed to at that point. You got to do what you got to do against a bunkered opponent and hope for some luck with deflections. And we did have some. I mean, the one that was almost the winner was one of those where it was like playing a game of pinball inside the box. So, but yeah, 14 block shots and a ton of aerial chances off of set plays. You get some wild swings, and you can have one of these kind of games where you create a lot of chances, but a lot of them probably have more variance to them. But yeah, I just want to echo what a lot of people have been saying. It was such an enjoyable game to watch. I mean, my mom was making fun of me because I was over here on Saturday too, and she saw me jumping around and stuff because I had to watch it on my I didn't have my normal setup, so I was on my iPad. So it was just one of those games, where you're jumping around and fidgeting and think something's happening, and it was just a really enjoyable game.
Yeah, I watched it through the pleasant haze of a couple of ciders in the pub, so I wasn't quite as stressed out as I might have been, but I was probably louder than I should have been if we put it that way. Alan, James brings up a couple of good points about the increased XG from set pieces. Brendan says an awful lot in interviews, said the old cliche about 2-0 being a very dangerous scoreline. But as James says, the idea that we would have dropped points, particularly when you looked at it at half-time, was an outlier. Play that second half 100 times, you're not going to drop any points from that. We really do appear to have a problem the minute we concede a goal, that we kind of crumble, whether that's in Europe and domestically against a decent enough team. I mean, is that a purely psychological thing? Is there patterns to that, do you think?
I certainly would agree. In Europe, we've seen the evidence of that. I mean, the number of times Celtic concede 2 goals quickly is just ludicrous. But actually, after Aberdeen scored, Celtic had the next 2 shots, right? And then Aberdeen had a break, and then they scored after what was a catalogue of mistakes from Celtic. It started with Maeda, who was just so off. I mean, he didn't look like he was fit to play the game. He just didn't look like he was. I don't know what was wrong with him. I mean, something drastically not right with him. He was so poor, and just didn't look like he had any energy or any of his normal fizz about him at all. And he gave the ball away in centre midfield, and then there was a catalogue of. Sorry, James.
Real quick, apologies for interrupting, but I looked because it just seems so strange. He actually played in Saudi Arabia on the 10th and then flew to Japan on the 15th. And then he has to fly all the way across. So, Rogers said that in the pregame and then postgame, which, literally guys flying all around the world. So there's not too many, even in international breaks, where you have to fly to Saudi Arabia. I think it was in Jeddah they played, and then all the way over to Japan, and then all the way back, all within, like 6 days. I mean, that's crazy. Like even a world-class athlete like him, I mean, that's a brutal schedule. So sorry.
No, that's fair. I mean, Occam's razor, that's probably the most likely reason, really. But we then there was then lots of little small errors. I talk about this. If you do 3 things badly or 3 things go wrong in a row, it will inevitably lead to a chance. And they got their break. They got their break in terms of the goal flew off Trusty into the roof of the net. I mean, where have we seen that before? No doubt Trusty will be getting pelters from a lot of people because of that. He dared to deflect the ball into the roof of the net. So I don't know, Laura. I don't know. I didn't really detect that. I think once they really got back into the game at 2-2, after that, I think they had one more shot in the 86th minute, and Celtic had 15 shots after that. So I think we did our best to try and score, to be honest. I think there were a lot of bad shots, selections, bad executions. Forrest had a lot of shots from outside the box that you're thinking, there's 10 guys between you and the goal and you're outside the box. But, take James's point, sometimes you get that ricochet. And in fact, it was a terrible Forrest shot that gave Alistair Johnson the ball right in front of the goal that he fired, and it hit some part of Duke's body. We're not allowed to see the camera angles to find out, but and he blocked it. So no, I don't think it's an issue at home, particularly in that regard. I think Celtic are generally very calm under Rodgers and just don't get flustered, to my eyes anyway. But I think Europe's a completely different story, and the evidence is there over years that we are vulnerable to getting hit with multiple sucker punches.
Yeah, hopefully it's not a pattern that does become evident in the domestic game. That was the game that was the Aberdeen game, so we remain level on points. Both of our 100% records in the league have been torn apart by that game, but we forge on nonetheless, and the battle continues. One team, James, who look like they might be slightly falling away from the battle is our rivals across the water, Rangers. I guess what confuses me about them, and I know I wanted to ask you this because as much as you get stick for it, you do analyse Rangers almost as much as you analyse Celtic, because as you say, you have to understand your rivals in order to defeat them. But you know, they always seem to pull out the bag in Europe, and yet they can't seem to do the same domestically. I don't know if it's to do with the opponents they're playing against, either domestically or in Europe, or if there's a different pressure on things, but they are struggling almost in complete opposition to what we're doing. So why do you think that is?
I wrote something about this not too long ago, looking at and speculating on whether or not they were trying to shift how they play. And I mentioned it last week because they've been at a chance creation deficit for really since they reached the Premiership. Even in the seasons when it was relatively close, or even in the 2021 season, they did not create as many chances as we did. And, X penalty. You have to qualify that for that season, non-penalty. And, they were very reliant on high crosses from Barisic and Tavernier, for example. And so there's been some evidence that they're trying to change, or Clement's trying to change how they play, but it hasn't been all that successful yet. And it really comes down to chance creation and creativity. And, Alan adeptly went into the layering of risks that they've been facing heading into Sunday, and maybe manifest more coming out of Sunday, apparently. Particularly from a social mood perspective, it appears. But again, this is where, when these things layer together, they can feedback loop. But if you just took a game at Kilmarnock, which, by the way, we talked about this, like Kilmarnock's been one of the unluckier teams so far this season. They've been underperforming. We talk about Aberdeen overperforming. Kilmarnock's been one of the teams underperforming their underlying numbers, so they're kind of due for some results. And going to Kilmarnock on that pitch on a windy day is never a good thing. Like we've had some pretty rough days going to Kilmarnock in those circumstances. So just like us dropping points at Hearts during the context of a 38-game season, like on the day, depending on the context of the game, everyone goes berserk and rips their hair out. But within the context of a season, where are we likely to drop points? Well, Tynecastle, at Kilmarnock, when there's bad weather, particularly, right? So that context, it wouldn't be that alarming that Rangers drop points or lose if you just kind of look at that narrowly. But given all the other things that, like Alan chronicled last week, this could be part of an acceleration of spiraling. Certainly hope so. That would be delightful. But yeah, I watched the game. They were dreadful. It was really, really poor. And again, I don't know. I can't tell how much of that was because of the environment with the wind. But this has been an issue for them. So you can't kind of just abstract that away. But yeah, chance creation continues to be, I think, their big quality chance creation continues to be their big bugaboo.
Yeah, Alan, you mentioned it before, that a potential tie against Aberdeen, which I believe is coming up before the end of October, for Rangers could cause them problems. I mean, looking at it realistically, we've talked about how Aberdeen might be overperforming. We've talked about how other teams might be underperforming. I like the laugh as much as the next person that they're in a fight for third place. But how realistic is that? Is it going to come? Is the norm going to return with this team, or do you think there is a real chance that they could, finish lower down the table than second?
So I want to mark the final rites of the original Rangers Football Club, whose funeral officially was last week. They are formally liquidated and are no more. So I want to come to that. But before, and actually, the reason I mentioned that, teeing it up, segueing beautifully, of course, is that the latter part of what I'm about to say on that is that So here's the last bit first. Is that they're kind of being forced to live within their means. That's essentially what's happening. Now, nobody in the Scottish media and none of their own fans will couch it in those terms, but that's exactly what it is. Because of UEFA FSR, mainly, they are being forced to live within their means. So they've had to, because their wage bill was the largest in Scotland, which is ludicrous when you think about the financial advantage that Celtic has, and it's evident to anyone that can read a set of accounts. They've had to suddenly implement an austerity drive, which means that not only have they got rid of a lot of backroom personnel, and therefore perhaps decisions are not being made optimally in that regard, but also the players that they can afford to bring in tend to fall into the sort of distressed goods categories, and that could mean injury profile, attitude, ability, all of the above, right? And therefore every signing is a risk in that sense, and you can then end up with what is then added to the mix is you end up with a manager that appears very intransigent about how he sets his team up, how he wants them to play, a team that has very little pace in it, and who's key, and a team that is chronically short of creativity, and whose really their most important creative outlet is declining badly, which is the much maligned James Tavernier. So what you end up with, in terms of answering your question, is how's this going to go? I think they'll still, like Celtic in 2021, they'll still have their 4-0, 6-0 wins at home. But if you look at they've played 8 games so far, right? 5 out of 8 games have had an XG differential of less than 1. Either way, off those 5 games, and it doesn't matter whether we're on the plus or the minus side of that differential, it doesn't matter, right? They've won 2, they've drawn 1, and they've lost 2. Okay? So if they continue to play the way that they did at Kilmarnock, and I don't think that's a stretch to say that they will, because of the playing risks that I've talked about at length, I think they're going to have an awful lot of games. Not Ross County at home, not Dundee at home, not a lot of teams at home, right? But certainly virtually every away game, apart from maybe the bottom 3 or 4 teams in the league, and a few home games against the likes of Celtic, Algorithm FC, Hearts, Aberdeen, right? There's going to be a number of even home games where they're going to be flirting with this less than 1 XG differential, and they're going to drop. At the moment, they're dropping 50% of points. And that quickly cascades. But what makes it even worse is that you've seen the social reaction, the revolting that's going on because of this loss, and that will every point dropped now will just pile the pressure on the board. The board, which I think is one wee dog, his owner, whatever. I don't think anyone in the board, and the manager is just going to pile on. So that's. I mean, and James. I know James rightly, and I agree with him. Will take the most optimistic view from their perspective, and that's kind of my risk manager view on life as well, is to always assume the worst from a Celtic perspective. Always assume your opposition are going to be at their best. But that's just my honest assessment of where they are. But I did want to, if you'll just indulge me for a little bit, I did want to mark the fact that last week, and again, you wouldn't know were it not for some social media accounts, that the original Rangers Football Club, founded in 1872, crucially incorporated in 1899, finally was laid to rest last week. It went virtually, I think, completely unremarked upon within the Scottish media. And therefore, this is why I want to talk about it, really. I mean, actually, if we go back 12 years, it's taken 12 years to get to this stage. And my God, have those liquidators lined their pockets. I think the creditors, and these are small businesses, these are, at the time, Her Majesty's in, Revenue and Customs, they ended up getting just 14.4 pence in the pound. So the face painter got 14.4 pence in the pound, HMRC got 14.4 pence in the pound. This is an absolute disgrace, an absolute travesty. And to be fair, business reporters, the people on the business desks, 12 years ago, accurately reported the death of Rangers. It was reported 100% faithfully. But the sports reporters, the Scottish Football Association, and the SPFL, including Celtic, concocted a lie. And basically, the club continued a continuation of history as the same Rangers. Why did they concoct that lie? Well, it's a mixture of all the usual motivations: fear, greed, and partiality. People were whipped up into are led to believe that there'd be civil unrest on the streets, that commercial deals would collapse, that there'd be no TV money coming into the game, that sponsors would all walk away because there was no Rangers. Absolute lies, all of it, and it was all used. So people, some people did act out of a belief that they needed to see a Rangers for commercial reasons. I completely get that. But anyway, what we need to remember is because, again, so many lies are told now, have been for 12 years, and it's a long time. It's half a generation, right? There'll be some young folk listening that might have heard about this, but two things that happened. We need to remember. Rangers generated two major issues. One was a social issue, where they withheld tax and national insurance and cheated Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs out of millions and millions and millions of pounds. Okay, and secondly, from a footballing perspective, so this is an industry perspective, and this is all the clubs that compete with Rangers in partnership. They failed to register player contracts with the SFA, rendering nearly 100 players ineligible for every single game that they appeared in over a 10-year period. Right. Now, the sanction for that anywhere in the world is to default the game. But this is possibly the greatest sporting scandal that's ever been visited upon sport in the United Kingdom. As far as the tax sham was created, what really made that worse was the fact that actually HMRC, there was always a possibility until the court cases started that they'd gone to the table and said, "Yep, you've got us banged to rights." And this is what Arsenal did, and I think a few other clubs in England. Yep, we agree. You've caught us. Let us know what we owe you. We'll pay it, and then we're all good. And we move on. And they would have to have taken maybe as much as a £20 million hit. But what did they do? They lied, and they lied. And therefore, when HMRC had to go through the torturous process for all of the courts they had to go through to prove the point, they were never gonna let them off, and they were hung basically in public as an example to the others. Whereas the player registration scam, that was swept away in a criminally misscoped sham of an inquiry. But either way you look at it, the club that was incorporated as a company in 1899 was sent into liquidation in 2012, and that process finalised this year. And listen, incorporation is a prerequisite for operating as a professional football club. A club has to transact. A club has to do business, has to sell tickets, has to issue contracts, has to enter into commercial deals, and so on and so forth. UEFA rules, regulations, legislations are very clear on what a football club is. It has to have that legal personality. The club and the company are one and the same thing. When the football club dies, the company dies, they're dead. And that's it. It's really simple. It's not complicated. They're not unique. They didn't have an original structure. That they didn't have a engine room subsidiary or whatever fucking bollocks the idiots came up with to wash it all away. The irony of it is that people actually forget is there was actually a holding company. There was actually a holding company, because if you remember, Rangers Football Club was part of Murray International Group, and David Murray actually had a holding company called Murray International Sports, and Rangers kind of for reporting purposes, as far as the Murray International Group was concerned, did actually feed into that Murray International Sports. They never got liquidated. It was the football club that got liquidated. It's funny that, isn't it? So, listen, a lie was necessary to enable Charles Green and his merry band, including, and let's remember this, it's important, Charles Green's group of ne'er-do-wells included somebody who was on Interpol's most wanted list. Yes, that's true, right? Because, it was felt you had to have A Rangers in Scottish football. So that lie was allowed to perpetuate. We wouldn't have sponsorship, we wouldn't have TV deals, clubs would go out of business, and this disgusting threat that there would be disorder on the streets. And do you know what? There was disorder on the streets. When was the disorder on the streets? When they won the 55th title. Yes, there was. Now, this is all called moral hazard, okay? So Scottish football basically went down the road of enforcing moral hazard on all of us, entered into willingly by a Peter Lowell-led Celtic, I should add. And what has happened since? Well, the new club has continued to rack up debts, relied upon director loans. All the while, a cavalcade of colourful characters have rotated through the boardroom. Alistair Johnston is still a key figure at Rangers, the new Rangers. The criminal Dave King was the chairman and is still the majority shareholder. This is what moral hazard looks like, kids. Okay? So this football club, this new football club, has ended up in court with virtually every commercial partner they've had dealings with, right? This is a delinquent football club, and this is what happens when you go down the road of willingly entering into a moral hazard. So this is where we are today, right? But there is light at the end of the tunnel, because what I will say about Peter Lowell, and he willingly allowed this to happen, and certainly didn't do anything to stop it. Maybe he was limited in what he could do, but certainly the SPFL board were of a mind to let this Frankenstein club to meander its way through Scottish football again. But what also Celtic were central to, and in concert with UEFA licensing committee, was in drafting the new UEFA policies around financial fair play and financial sustainability. It's almost as if the new rules were written with certain delinquent football clubs in mind. So specific were the risks that these rules now seek to address. And therefore, it is very difficult now for this new club, which is actually hamstrung by the same structural disadvantages that the old one was. The structural disadvantages in terms of the financial gap to the Celtic that Fergus McCann built, that led David Murray to overspend using very generous mates rates from the banks that was available to nobody else in Scottish football, and then lastly by cheating Her Majesty and the whole of Scottish football. So although the same people are there, and they've obviously learnt nothing because they're continuing to rack up and spend money on players they don't have, biggest wage bill in Scotland. And so, but what I would leave you, and guess what? Yeah, and what was the result of this? Guess who was in the first 17 clubs to be on an FSR watch list, a UEFA watch list? Yes, you guess it, our favourite delinquent football club. But as I say, it's not all doom and gloom, because the new reality is that they're not going to die. They're not going to get liquidated. The second club isn't going to get liquidated because UEFA FSR will actually protect them from themselves. But it's actually worse what they're now going to be living in. They're going to be living in a hell, in a purgatory of being a distant second to a financially stronger Celtic. Even algorithm-driven Hearts and well-managed Aberdeen may put second place at risk, right? And, the odd cup, they may well win the odd cup, absolutely. But, for those who don't do walking away, and I think it will be the apathy that really kills their competitiveness in the end, hell mend them.
Wow. I mean, how do you even follow that, James?
You don't. All that kept going through my mind when Alan was talking, and specifically when he was using the term moral hazard, is that I'm concerned that they might get a bank charter and get swap lines with the Bank of England and the Fed. That would be the one way that they might be able to dig themselves out of this. Because if they were a bank, then they could just be brazenly, oh yeah, Alan, you're an ex-bank guy. I can't get into this with you.
No. I was a retail banker, James. I don't understand any of this concocted nonsense of products that people dream up to scam people with, right? So yeah, in Golden Retriever, please.
Well, it's basically the issue of moral hazard, that we all bail out these big banks for gambling with their money, depositors' money. And then, the taxpayer comes in through inflation and through central banks bailing them out. And it was something like, so this was the criticism coming out of the global financial crisis in 2008, was that all the banks were bailed out. No one went to jail, even though there was massive fraud all over the place. Provable, known fraud, and this is where the term "too big to fail" came. And that's you really extend the same concept to Rangers in 2012. That was the same rationale. Obviously, totally different situation, but they're too big to fail. We can't let them go. Scottish football can't stand. It's like we can't let J.P. Morgan go down. We can't let HSBC go down. And what does that mean? Actually, in financial markets, is the equity holders get wiped out and restructure. You don't, if you're smart, you don't do it in an uncontrolled way. That's where the government probably could and should help. But, when you're a CEO gambling hundreds of billions of dollars and it goes wrong, maybe you shouldn't get your cushy pay package. And you should probably go to jail if there's fraud involved, that kind of thing. So, yeah, that's what kept going through my mind, because it's like there's so many parallels with how governments treat the bankers with this ridiculous access to free money, and we all pay the bill, and that's fans of Scottish football, including Rangers supporters, by the way, the good faith ones that aren't down with a lot of things that go on. And we've had Patrick on, you know what I mean? Like there are a lot of good people that are Rangers supporters. I have family members, so it's. They get hurt too. It's a whole thing. Yeah. When you allow moral hazard and you don't allow fairness to win out, everyone loses ultimately, and that's So
I think on the financial side, I would agree. I think the same thing happened on the sporting side. I'm firmly of the view that, and this is my opinion, firmly of the view that what happened was that UEFA knew what was going on. They understood the situation perfectly. But they also knew that if they took the lid off this box, that
right.
whereby not only were Rangers players not correctly registered to play in the SPFL, they weren't correctly registered to play in Europe. And if they'd opened that box and allowed litigation by every club that Rangers had played in Europe over the last 10 years, it would have been an absolutely uncontainable show. And therefore, I think it was contained. And actually, people keep saying, "Oh, Doncaster says this. Doncaster says we're the same club. The SFA say we're the same. UEFA say the same." Yeah, do you know what? Don't listen to what people say. Look at what they do, right? So the SFA treated the new Rangers as a new club. Their actions treated them as a new club. The UEFA treated the new Rangers as a new club, right? So they were treated as a new club, but everyone stuck their hand up the moral hazard puppet and said, "Oh, we're the same club," right? Yeah. And everybody knew that it wasn't. And it's going to be the same reason that Man City end up with a slap on the wrist, because that's what I was about to say. Yeah. Some delinquency is so big and the contagion is so wide that everyone just goes, "I'm not touching this. How do we contain it?" And so I think they just thought, you know what, the club got liquidated. All the other fans, all the rivals will chalk that one up as a win. And actually, I don't know if people were far-sighted enough to think, well, they're going to have to form as a new club, and that's some journey back. That, and good luck to them, sort of thing. And they'll never really be the same again in that respect. And maybe that was the view that was taken, and maybe that was the pragmatic view that was taken, really. But justice wasn't seen to be done. But as I say, people did act as if they were a new club, irrespective of what bullshit they spoke. Again, which was out of fear, in many respects, in terms of if you dared not say that, the threats would come your way.
Not a problem that any of us suffer from, speaking the truth, I'm sure. But we shall move.
Let's move on to something exciting, like going to Bergamo and playing Atalanta. Piece
Yes,
of
Oh,
cake.
what a blast!
let's do
Well,
that.
James, I'll let you go on. You take this.
So
I think people are sick of me now.
a fantastic segue, James. We'll look at the upcoming Atalanta game away in Bergamo on Wednesday, if I've got my days right.
Early game on Wednesday, so set your
Early game on
5:45
alarms.
Wednesday.
kickoff. Yeah. Don't
Yeah.
get caught out by the 5:45 kickoff.
Yeah,
Girls and
set your
boys.
alarms if you're James. Stick it on the radio on the drive home from work if you're me. It's going to be a fascinating one, James. We already have the hurdle in the way that it's an away game that Celtic are playing in, so that's like 3 goals down already before we even start. We are playing against last season's Europa League winners who have got 4 points out of a possible 6 in their opening 2 Champions League games, not least against Arsenal. One of the games, and then a convincing 3-0 victory against Shakhtar Donetsk. Their domestic form has been a little bit more up and down, but we know what happens when we look too far into that. As far as Dortmund was concerned, we convinced ourselves that they were there to be had, and let's just say that wasn't the case. You watched Atalanta over the weekend, you were saying before we started recording. What is your impressions of them, and how do you think we can fare against them?
I've kept an eye on Atalanta the last few seasons, so and I wouldn't claim to have watched them a ton, but I've watched them a fair amount. We have Paramount Plus, it's called in the US, and I get all of Serie A's games.
Do you have to sit and watch Mika Richards and Jamie Carragher? I do feel for you, I'm sorry.
Yeah, we get a lot of crap announcers. We get. Well, I won't be crass, but I was going to use a horrible term. But we get the leftovers from a broadcast perspective. But on Sunday morning at 7 a.m. and I have my coffee, I'll throw on Serie A because it's usually the first game that's on a Sunday morning. And so I've followed them because I find them to be fascinating because of what they've done. They've been on one of these fascinating clubs like AZ Alkmaar, where they've found their own niche within the context of adopting analytics, doing it very smartly, and punching way above their weight. And so I've just been fascinated by them because of that. And I also follow them closely because they're in our peer group. You know, Alan and I talk about benchmarking and looking at the peer group. And when you look at, obviously they have a competitive advantage relative to being in Serie A, but if you look at how much they spend on player wages, I've got a horror story coming up for people watching. They spend less than we do. The idea that we're going into this game and you have a lot in our support that are horrified going to Italy to play Atalanta, this is not Dortmund. This is not a team that just spends a ton of money, like dwarfs us financially. This is more so, a direct peer group team. And, they have the 8th highest wage bill in Italy last season. So they punch above their weight. They're very smartly run. And to me, they are the rebuttal to what I would give to what Brendan Rodgers said on Friday when he was asked about analytics at his press conference about Tisdale and the hiring, which is that analytics should be, I've said it consistently, should be the base layer. That's foundational for making smart decisions. It's not something that gets filtered through culture and model and all this other nonsense. Because as we talked about, what is this about? It's about being smart. It's about measuring objective reality and making good decisions. That's universal. Like that's what you build off of. So that's what Atalanta does. And that's what makes them so interesting. That's what makes them scary, but they're different kind of scary. They're scary because of how well coached they are, how well organized they are, how smart they are, and how they go about doing all of these things. They are not invulnerable. They give up chances. Like, again, their wage bill is lower than ours. So they don't have Adeyemi. They don't have Mbappe. They don't have like the world-class speed and combination with.
They do have Ademola Lookman though.
Well, right. So they've got some good players, and that's part of their model that they've been smart while they've kept the wage bill down is they've started to pay more in transfer fees. So, they're up into the 20, 25 million euro type area where they're starting to pay for players because they've got the money that they're generating off their player trading model, winning, Europa League trophies, that kind of thing. So they're able to reinvest. They're just doing it in a bit of a different way. And they do have speed. Like, I'm not saying they don't have a lot of really fast players. They do. It's just that intersection between skill and speed and size and power and all this stuff. They're a couple of notches below like the highest end of Europe. Like I said, they're doing it smartly within their system, how they play, and doing a lot of things I would argue we haven't been and still aren't doing. So this is absolutely not a game that we should be going into horrified. I'm actually not horrified. I think there's a reasonable way. I talk about my central tendency. Like, my central tendency here is we lose 2-1. Like, that's about what we should expect. If, we come in with a good game plan, our players play well, they come in with what they always have or almost always have, which is a good game plan, and their players play well. Like, that's, and then you get who knows which keeper plays better than the other one and finishing on the day. But, 2-1 would be kind of what I would expect. After what's been going on with Rodgers recently, I have no idea what that game plan is going to be. Like, I'm hopeful that he's going to go in maybe a little more humble than he's been talking. But we'll have to see. But yeah, people going into this horrified to go play Atalanta away. I mean, doesn't mean we can't lose 5-0 because it's absolutely within the range of possibilities. But we're going to get chances against them. Like, they're not going to be the type of team, like, they set up to basically cancel Arsenal. We're not Arsenal. No offense. Like, let me put it this way. They're not going to perceive us as Arsenal because they're too smart to do that. Because, we're nowhere near Arsenal's level. So they're probably going to be front-footed. They're going to come at us. I said to Alan last week and Martin, you kind of gauge when they're a little more concerned about the strength of the opposition, they'll play more 3-4-3. And these are fluid, as we always say, shape. Whereas if they're front-footed and playing a team that they're really confident, particularly when they're at home, they'll be more like 3-4-1-2. So they're a little more narrow, and there's two strikers. It's the same personnel for the most part. So yeah, I mean they're really good, but they're not scary good. This is not that upper echelon of team. To me, they're like a notch or two higher than Bodo Glimt, right? We played that tie against Bodo Glimt, lost 5-1 in the Conference League, I guess it was, right? Remember that fun one?
Yeah.
And everyone's like, oh, yeah, they're really well coached and they're really well organized. And they have some good players. And, I mean, that's kind of what Atalanta is, only with just a little, more money. So that part can be scary if we don't have our act together. And we didn't have our act together. We talked about this at the time. We don't think Ange really actually prioritized that tie that much, it seemed. We thought going into it and coming out of it. But so we will prioritize this. It shouldn't be like that, hopefully. But yeah, so I just wanted to get into that because I hear a lot of this stuff about the people being horrified about Atalanta. And, the consensus was overly optimistic going into Dortmund. So I talk about these buy at the sound of cannons, sell at the sound of trumpets. I think we're hearing a little too many cannons going into this game on a relative basis.
My hot Arsenal take is that Declan Rice is a vastly overrated footballer, but we'll save that for another day. Alan, why don't you close out with your thoughts on the Atalanta game, and then what we can expect from you guys at the end of the week in terms of content. My one framing point that I'll put around this is James is expecting humility from Brendan Rodgers in this game. How likely is that?
Yeah, well, listen, I don't know. I honestly don't know. This is the big thing. I'm waiting to find out, really. I mean, I take James's points, but I mean, in terms of we talk about ELO ratings, which is a pretty well respected methodology for ranking teams across different countries playing in different competitions. It weights the relative strength of the opposition and the result against them to give a single score. I think it was used for chess originally or something like that. They're only 4 points behind Dortmund on the ELO scale, ELO ratings now. And I say 4 points. That's in the context of I think Dortmund were like 1,870 and they're like 1,866. So 4 points is bugger all, really, in that context. They have had a bit of a sticky start. And fascinatingly, they lost at home 3-2 to
Como.
Hearts' Italian algorithm cousins Como. So the algorithms work. I tell you, the algorithms work, right? Hearts are not going to lose a game this season now. They're playing according to what the algorithm spits out. And yeah, so they lost at home to Como, who used the same database as Hearts apparently are using, right? But they've actually seems to have hit form, right? They've won the last three games really well. James watched the game at the weekend, 2-0 at Venezia, 5-1 at home to Genoa, and then they hammered Shakhtar Donetsk 3-0 away. So they're hitting form, and they had that 0-0 at home to Arsenal, which was they played a different way there. They contained a better team, and they've contained them really effectively. Interestingly, James says 2-1. If you look at their XG for the season, it is actually their XG would suggest the averaging 2 and they're conceding 1. Right now, they've actually overperformed on goals conceded, and they do introduce a lot of risk to the game. They are a very attacking side. They'll commit up to 7 people forward. They'll look to try and when they play us, their 3 forwards are going to be very narrow. So they're going to look for sometimes even their centre backs. They'll play 3 at the back. One of the centre backs will go on sometimes, and they'll try and create 3v2 overloads out wide. They'll get a lot of crosses into the box, a lot of cutbacks as well to the 3 forwards. So that's what on the ball, very attacking. Off the ball, they're going to be very front foot in terms of pressing. And they're going to man mark. They're going to man mark all over the pitch, and it then becomes a sort of talent match really in that regard. So that's a risky way of playing. It's a risky way of playing, but also so in some respects this plays to our weaknesses in terms of they will go long on occasion and they can hit their pretty quick forwards. Even if they don't have the top end speed that Dortmund did, they've got very physical forwards. So we know that Scales isn't the best in terms of he can get muscled off the ball. I think Trusty's probably maybe got the same issue. Not seen too much of it, but just on feedback from Sheffield United fans, etc. So we may see a lot of balls sailing over our centre backs' heads, which could cause problems. We may see a lot of very quick counter attacks down the channels, and the 2 wing backs will be very, very high, and they'll stay high, and they get a lot of attacking output from the two wing backs as well. As I say, lots of crosses and cutbacks to and from each other. They'll also, if they see a team passing slowly and laterally across the back, they will absolutely go for them. Can't think who that resembles, so that's a bit of a worry as well. But listen, there is hope, right? There is hope. They hope to try and get the front 3 isolated. They leave absolutely enormous gaps in the middle to try and get some overloads out wide. If we can get Engels, Hatate into those half spaces and then quickly play forward against the 3 at the back, they get done on the counter attack. This is the big risk for them. Gasparini's approach is more Ange than Ange. I think Ange talked a slightly more aggressive game than what he actually played. Gasparini actually lives it, right? He will look to score 5 goals, and if he concede 4, he's happy, right? So there is that counter-attacking chance. So I think we just need to be very, a bit like Aberdeen, actually. Aberdeen was a good template. Keep possession when you can, but if you're under pressure, launch it and make sure that the triggers are there. Kuhn, Maeda, Kyogo, they see the trigger. If they see the press coming, they get on their bike, and we can give them trouble on the counter, and then it comes down to can we finish our chances? Because I think, as James says, we will get some. It's going to be another absolute knuckle ride. It's going to be another lots and lots of goalmouth action. Hopefully, it won't be as one-sided as the last one. Because James is right. They don't have the sheer talent that Dortmund have, but they're a far better organised side, far better, more coherent. Gasparini's been manager for 8 years. I mean, he's one of the top 5 most longest serving coaches in European football. He's like almost getting to Simeone levels of that club. He is the embodiment of that club, and as James says, they recruit players to play the system. The system never changes. It really never changes. They always play more or less the same way. The tweak that James mentioned is tiny. It's just a slightly more centralised element to where some of the attackers are positioned. The approach with and without the ball doesn't change. So we know how they're going to play. And I just hope Rodgers is a little bit more circumspect in how he sets up Celtic.
And this is a huge. I mean, this might, it's, you can always say the most important game of the season. I think in some elements, like the way we are coming into this game, this is a massive game relative to Brendan Rodgers. I can't stress that enough. I mean, it's how he decides to set up against this team going into this place with a far less uncertain set of circumstances than Dortmund. We could, he wasn't as transparent, let's say, as he could have been coming out of that game on the performance and the context of the game. Our sense was that he went in way too optimistic. I could forgive that because of the complexity of Dortmund heading into that game. This is not that. This what you're getting into here. This is a very clear and obvious Atalanta opponent. So if he lays an egg again on the strategy and the tactics, to me, that's going to be very concerning. And so, I mean, that's not my base case. Like I'm hopeful. And I think there's reason to be hopeful. But
I will take Brendan laying an egg rather than a massive turd this time. So
that's an upgrade.
That would be an upgrade, yeah. Listen, guys, if you want reassured when you get bad news, don't come to James or Alan, because all I've taken out of this is they're slightly better than Bodo Glimt, who beat us 5-1, and it's going to be a case of talent versus talent. So who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? Alan, tell us a little bit about what we can expect from Huddle Breakdown at the end of the week in terms of content.
Yeah, so we'll do a piece. Obviously, we're ramping up. We've kind of publicised the fact that there's going to be a subscription model. The website is up and running. The link will be on the YouTube, or just search the Huddle Breakdown, and you'll find our site. There's all sorts of sections. We'll do a piece on that over the next couple of weeks, with a view to really probably by the next international break really start to launch things and get rocking and rolling. But until then, all this wonderful content, all the articles that we're producing, all the podcasts. Will be another one recorded on Thursday after the Atalanta game and ahead of the Motherwell game, which we'll have another special guest on from the Motherwell side of the house to look at that game. All that will continue to be free for the next 2-3 weeks until we put that model in place. And I hope you feel that it's worth supporting the channel, because a lot of work goes in behind the scenes, really. So your support would be very much appreciated.
Indeed it would. Alan, James, thank you very much for joining me tonight. Big week ahead. Hopefully all goes well. This has been the Huddle Breakdown.